Mr. Derek Veenhoff, who's better known as Deek.
Drinking liquor with DJ Deek, we out laughing.
Yo, Deek.
Okay, welcome to the Deekast, episode 51, the first video Deekast ever. We have a very special guest over the internet today, Mr. Mick West. Welcome, Mick.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. So Mick is a science writer, skeptic. He runs Metabunk, the website dedicated to debunking a variety of conspiracy theories with polite discussion, understanding, and communication. And that's kind of the topic of his new book, Escaping the Rabbit Hole, How to Debunk Conspiracy Theories Using Facts, Logic, and Respect. So he also he's a retired game programmer and was one of the creators of the Tony Hawk Pro Skater series, which a lot of you listeners will remember that game. So again, thanks for being here today, Mick. It's cool to have you here.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So why don't you give us a little bit of your background? Why don't we start with the sort of your education background as far as the programming and the video game stuff, and maybe the founding of Neversoft, because a lot of our listeners are into gaming and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I grew up in England, as you can probably tell by the accent. Not everybody can. And I was really into doing video games when I was young and just messing around with a computer. I had a Sinclair ZX81 and then a ZX Spectrum. It's like really, really old computers back in the early 80s. And I spent a lot of time messing around with those. And I went to college, got a degree in computer science, but really I just kind of got through by the skin of my teeth because I spent most of my time just playing with my computers, which by then was, I think, an Atari ST. And then because I spent all this time just messing around and not really working, I was lucky enough to get a job in the video game industry, because back then it was a very informal industry and pretty much anyone who with a bit of programming experience on the home computers could get a job. So I went straight out of college, got this job programming video games. And after a few years working in the UK, I moved because people just paid you a lot more over in California. I got paid like over twice as much for the same job, essentially. So it made a lot of sense. Plus, it sounded like fun going to California. And then after a year in California, I set up Neversoft with Joel Jewett and Chris Ward. It's basically Joel's idea. He just wanted to start a company because he knew that's where the money was. And he gathered together a programmer and an artist. And we set up Neversoft, and the rest is history. Yeah, we did a few games, and then we did the Tony Hawk series.
Yeah, that's interesting. So 95 was the first game, Skeleton Warriors?
Yeah, Skeleton Warriors, which was based on like a little toy line of these little action figures and a Saturday morning cartoon. It was a pretty bog standard game back then. We actually started doing it on the Sega Genesis, but that was just around the time things were shifting over from the 8-bit to the 16-bit, the 16-bit to the 32-bit, from the Sega Genesis to PlayStation. And so we dropped the Genesis version and we started working on a PlayStation version, and that was our very first game.
And so 99 was when Tony Hawk Pro Skater came out. Now, how did that come about? Like, whose idea was it, and how did you get all the access to all the pro skaters and make all those deals?
Well, it's basically Activision's idea. At the time, we'd just done a game for them called Apocalypse, which was a game starring Bruce Willis, and they'd done all this like motion capture and stuff with him and voice recording, and then they had another developer do it, and the other developer messed it up, so they gave it to us. We did a good job on that, and then they were just looking for someone to do a skateboarding game because someone in their marketing department had kind of identified that was like a hole in the market, and they thought that that would be a good game to do because kids were into skateboarding, kids were into video games, put the two together. So they said, let's do one. And then they said, who should we get to be the face of the game? And they threw around a few names. And Tony Hawk, floated to the top. And then Tony did the 900 at the X Games, which was a big deal back then. He did the world's first 900 in competition.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and that kind of coincided with the game, and it just all kind of came together at the right time. We did a really good game back then on the PlayStation, and yeah, we it sold really well, and so we did a whole bunch more games.
Yeah, well, I mean, I grew up, or I was born in '88, so like that was the
Hmm.
perfect time for me and my friends. So you'd go to somebody's house back then. I mean, that was the game everybody had. Like it was that, or maybe if they had a 64, it was Mario 64 or something like that. But it was
Yeah.
just like the default game to pick up and play with your friends. And so I don't know, and it wasn't just any game. I mean, that game was pretty groundbreaking. I mean, you had a number of sequels there afterwards as
Mm.
well. So to give people an idea, that's in a long roundabout way sort of how you I mean you're retired now from that
Hmm.
success, and so now you as a hobby spend your time looking into these conspiracy theories and these sort of uh, what do you call it, anti-science,
Yeah,
non-scientific things,
pseudoscience. Yeah.
and you also got your pilot's license, so that got you into the contrail and chemtrail thing.
Yeah, after I retired, like pretty early in life, because basically we sold the company to Activision, which allowed me to retire. And after I retired, I did like a bunch of different things. I worked for a game developer magazine for a while, did some contracting and stuff like that. But I had a lot of spare time. I wasn't fully retired, but and I'd always been interested in a couple of things. One of them was flying. I'd always wanted to learn to fly, but just never really had the time. And so I started taking flying lessons. Um, and during the course of that, I came across the chemtrail conspiracy theory. But stepping back a bit, I'd always been really interested in debunking for many years before that. Back until before I was a teenager, really, I used to read about things like aliens and ghosts and UFOs, and they were just really interesting things at first, and then I would try to explain them and try to figure out what was going on, and that just kind of when after I retired, I had the time to actually do that as a hobby full time essentially, and so that's where the Contrail Science thing came from, which was all about debunking the chemtrails thing, and that led to Metabunk, and here we are.
Right, right. Did you have any hand in doing that Tony Hawk level that had the UFOs? There was a Roswell level in the
No, I
first
did.
one.
Yeah, when I was there when they did it, but yeah,
uh,
each I was the lead programmer essentially, and kind of the project lead in some ways on the technical side, and so I didn't design the levels. Actually,
right.
the very first game, how the level designs came about was I got everybody in the company together, which was only about 12 people at the time, and I sat them all down in front of a whiteboard and said, right, we have to decide what the levels are, and I got my marker out and just started drawing things on this whiteboard, and we basically designed like 5 levels with people just shouting things out. So we said like, here's the school, what should we do? We'll have like stuff on it. What type of stuff? We'll have like tapes, and one of them can be on the roof and the other one can be over here in the pool, and you can grind this long rail here.
Well, yeah, it
uh
was really
just shout
detailed.
the stuff out.
Like there were so many like sub areas that you could go into. It was one
Mhm.
of the first games that had that too, where it wasn't just very straight away. Like there was a lot of
Yeah.
different. I mean, yeah, they were somewhat linear maps to you had to get to the end of a lot of them and stuff like that. But so yeah, when you were younger in the book, you mentioned that you didn't want these things to scare you, sort of. So you
Yeah.
wanted to kind of get the truth around them and
Well, yeah, it was kind of uh when I was young, I was like scared of ghosts because I used to read like some ghost books and UFO books, and I'd be worried that there'd be aliens, coming to abduct me because I'd read about alien abductions, and it seemed like a real thing. When you're a kid,
right.
these things can feel very real, and they can be very scary. And I kind of grew out of it really. I didn't really, try to debunk it back then. It's just one of those things. I didn't get scared of ghosts after a while, to the same extent I didn't, believe in Santa Claus or whatever.
Yeah.
But later in life, like I was looking back and thinking it would have been better if I hadn't been scared of UFOs, scared of aliens abducting me back then. So it's kind of a little bit of my motivation for debunking things is that there's no need to be scaring kids with tales of aliens sneaking into their bedrooms at night.
Right. I mean, they're kind of cool stories, but
Well,
yeah,
yeah,
it
but
could be scary for some. Yeah.
yeah.
So, I mean, one of the interesting things about you is the approach that you have, which you discuss in the book, which is just an understanding and a communication, and really allowing, whether it's your friend or a family member, to explain their belief, and not to sort of shout them down and that kind of thing. I can fall victim to that in my life. Of in the past, you can calling people dumb or stupid or these kind of things, which you often do see that from the conspiracy believer side as well on the internet and that kind of thing. These words like
Yeah.
skeptard and whatever, like the word stupid
Yeah.
thrown around and that kind of thing. But I think that is the best approach to if you want to change someone's mind or reveal to them a lot more information that they might not have already accessed,
Hmm.
is to and you
Yeah.
talk about demarcation lines, which are I talk about them as camps. When I heard you say demarcation line, that makes a lot of sense to me, which is it's just referring to a geographical thing, right? Like a line
Hmm.
between a country. And
Yeah, well, yeah, it's kind of a virtual demarcation line here. It's
right.
a dividing line between two things. Like everything's on one side, everything's on the other. It's a clear dividing line where you demark it.
Yeah, and you talk about between these demarcation lines within the groups of conspiracy believers, they will often try to debunk one another
Hmm.
because they're trying to portray their belief as the true one. Kind of like
Yeah,
religions in a way, how different religions are trying to tit for tat and put the other ones down a notch in as far as the truth claims and that kind of thing, right?
yeah. Well, say for example with 9/11, you get people within the 9/11 community. Yes, quite a lot of them think that the towers were brought down with controlled demolition with explosives. And then there are people who just think that the government is behind organizing the hijackers. And then on the other side of the controlled demolition people, you've got people who think that no planes hit the Pentagon. And then further along, you've got people who think that no planes hit the towers. And then you've got people who think the towers were destroyed by energy beams from space or by nuclear explosions, or that it didn't happen at all, and the entire thing was staged, and they demolished the towers behind a giant curtain a few days later or something like that. So you
Hmm.
get this whole range of people, but everybody has got a line which they kind of draw a line and say, yeah, everything to one side of the line is quite sensible, and everything on the other side of the line is just ridiculous disinformation, and it varies by individual. So it's very important for you to figure out when you're talking to like someone like a friend who is a believer, where do they draw the line? What do they believe in? What do they not believe in? And if you look at that line, you find the things which they are most usually open to reason about, because they already know that things a little bit further along are wrong in their opinion, but they think that everything on that side is right. So if you say, well, what's the simplest thing that you disagree with? A good example there is with 9/11. Often people draw the line around the Pentagon. Did a plane hit the Pentagon? A lot of people think that there was no plane hitting the Pentagon, but it's quite a small shift of the line to actually realize that there actually was a plane. And if you go through all the evidence with them, you show them, here's where the wings hit the columns. Here's the actual bits of debris from the plane. Here's one of the engines of the plane. Here's the analysis of every single column in the building and what it got hit by, and what it looks like now and how it was repaired and things like that. And even you can say, here are the photos of the bodies of the people on the plane. They're actually
Right.
people, the passenger. There's bodies of the passengers. You probably don't want to do that in general, but these are things that you can show people, and there's such an overwhelming amount of evidence that it's actually fairly easy to shift that line eventually if the person is able to communicate with you, and if you're able to communicate with them. And that's the other big thing, really, is keeping a good quality line of communication going. Maintaining effective communication is really the first thing. So it's all about talking to them, listening to them, not being rude to them, not denigrating them, not belittling them, so you can keep that line of conversation going, and so you can eventually move that line a little bit.
Right, exactly. That makes sense. Yeah, back in the day, I got a hold of that Zeitgeist film
Mm-hmm.
in my teens, and a lot of my peers watched it too. And if people don't remember, it was that film that tried to portray 9/11 as some sort of inside job, and then it mixed it with something you don't have to pay taxes in the U.S., and then
Yeah.
how Jesus is also uh, either not real or as real as these other deities that have similar birth and death dates and these kind of things. It was a strange film, but it
It
kind of,
was very strange.
yeah, it was in the same realm sort of as that What the Bleep Do We Know? Kind of that same
Mhm.
time period where there was all this that woo stuff kind of coming out and whatnot. But I think for me, at least personally, it was just a lack of information. Like as I got older and started to read more and get into different sources, you start to pile up all this new information that
Yeah.
sort of weighs down on the old information, which to me, every person at every moment in their life, you kind of think you know everything because the sort of the circle around the knowledge that you have is full. This is your head is full of all the information that is there, and there's no
Yeah.
new information until somebody introduces or you pick up that book, which then shows. I mean, everybody's has that experience of don't even think about conspiracy theories, something else, just something, a field you don't know much about, and then you read a book and something comes along, you go, wow, I didn't know that. Like, this is cool. Let me learn more about that. So I feel like everybody can relate to that sort of thing. But anyway, for me, it
Yeah.
was reading books like, well, nowadays it's The Looming Tower and that other book by Terry McDermott about the hijackers, Perfect Soldiers. These kind
Mhm.
of books that really go through in detail all the background of the hijackers and the financing and all these. I mean, to me, it's more lengthy than these short 1 hour documentaries that try to. And they're always well put together with music and this kind of thing. So it's just
Yeah,
I
that's the
feel like
thing.
more information is the key.
If people they start out usually not knowing very much about a subject, say like 9/11, they haven't really heard very much about it. They haven't really looked into it in great depth, and then they watch a documentary like Loose Change or Zeitgeist or something like that, and because they don't really know that much about 9/11, all they're really seeing is just one huge chunk that's on one side of the argument. It's like they were to go into like they're on a jury, say, and they're going into a court case for some kind of murder trial or something like the O.J. Simpson trial, and the only thing they listen to is the prosecution. They when the defense comes along, they just they blank it out. They don't listen to it at all, or they just don't even know that there is a defense at all. They're just going into a room where the prosecution lays out the case for this murder for several days, and because the prosecutor is very good at what he does, it's very convincing because all he is telling you is the evidence that supports his theory. And that's what happens when you watch a film like Zeitgeist or Loose Change or any of the 9/11 conspiracy truth type things, or the books that come out like the David Ray Griffith books. Those are only presenting the one side. So, like you say, you don't know that much. Then it gets filled up with everything on one side, and it takes quite a while for you to kind of fill up the other side to balance that out and eventually realize that this stuff on the other side is actually the real stuff. And this stuff that you first came across, even though it seemed really good at the time, is actually just complete nonsense. I mean, I'm sure if you go back and look at Zeitgeist now, you'd probably just laugh at it because
Mm-hmm.
it's a pretty ridiculous film.
Yeah, I think it also play. I mean, it's fairly obvious, but these things also play on people's emotions, and a lot of people have sort of uh, a disrespect of authority or this kind of the
Hmm.
government's out to get us or these big corporations are out to get us, that kind of thing. It's becoming more and more popular, I think, with these days of the post-truth and fake news era and this a sentiment against the government. I have just a small example. I have you heard of like safe injection sites like for
Yeah,
drug users?
yeah.
Yes. So
Clean needles and stuff like that.
yeah, in Canada we have a few, and in our city here near Niagara Falls, they've just opened one as well. And so a lot of people around here are getting upset about it, like people sometimes do when these things first come around. And I think it's a lot of knee-jerk reaction. But even within some of the semi-rational opinions against it, there's also people who are saying things like, "Well, this is for the government to somehow make more money or to get more people on
Hmm.
drugs and that kind of thing." And it's like I have someone coming on the podcast next episode, the director of one of these centers, to kind of like talk about it and get people really thinking about it, because it's like you said, it's a thing that people don't know about, and it comes along into their psyche, and then based on their past emotions and these things, they have a knee-jerk reaction to it. And I think that's what happened with like the Zeitgeist film, that kind of thing. Like, oh, of course George Bush was in on it, or this and that. Now we have another reason to kind of, you know, go against the power structure, the military-industrial complex, that kind of thing.
Definitely, people do respond to anything basically that attacks the people in power. There's a book where I can't remember the name of the book. I think it's American Conspiracies or something like that, where they say like the conspiracy theories are for losers, meaning specifically the losers of the last election. So the people who feel disenfranchised, the people who feel out of power, or the economically disenfranchised, like poor people or young people who haven't got a job. They feel they're fighting against something, and quite often it's the political party in power, but it can also be the political system and the economic system in general. So you're fighting against the man. So you're getting you view these people as the enemy, so it becomes very, very easy to suspect them of actually doing something. So when 9/11 happened, a lot of the people who thought that Bush did it were Democrats, and it was a much more popular theory on the Democrat side. Now as it kind of recedes into history, people don't really identify it so much with one party or the other, and it's just become a general anti-authoritarian thing. But back in the day, it was very much a thing that Democrats would believe more easily than Republicans would.
Mm-hmm. Do you notice any differences amongst different countries and demographics and that kind of thing? As far as conspiratorial belief, because in America it seems to be very heavy. There's also a lot of events that happen in America, so it's chocked full of things. But like I've read that like in the Middle East, there's certain sentiments in certain areas, against Israel and that kind of thing. Like everything's always blamed on Israel. Or is there any other ones that you're aware of, like in Asia or anything like that?
Well, a lot of countries are actually a lot more conspiratorial than the US, but quite often they have America as the enemy. So a lot of countries, like especially obviously in the Middle East, are going to believe that 9/11 was orchestrated by the American government or by the American government in conjunction with the Israeli government, just because they view America as being the enemy in the Middle East. And in lots of other countries, you have perhaps a more primitive understanding of things like science, for example, and it becomes easy for conspiracy theories to take root. There's big problems in countries like India and parts of Africa where you have a rural community which is just kind of starting to get cell phones, and so they're all on these WhatsApp applications, instant messaging, and they're discovering the internet for the first time, and they're kind of discovering it with a lack of perspective. So you get things like essentially witch hunts being organized on WhatsApp. So you've got this strange juxtaposition of this really old things like people calling other people witches and then actually going around to their houses and killing them, but it's organized on instant messaging. It's a bizarre kind of juxtaposition of the old and the new, and it's a bit of a problem. Yeah, it's because they rushed into the new technology, and they don't really have the kind of the background and understanding of how the world works, and that magic doesn't work that we have to some degree in the West. Although in America we have a lot of very fundamental religious people, which is something you have less of in countries like the UK. But in general, the UK and the US are fairly similar in terms of the conspiratorial belief.
Mm. Um, there, I mean, there are some real conspiracies throughout history, right? And sometimes they're referred to by someone who's trying to convince you that a given conspiracy is real. And do you know some examples that people often cite? Like, I mean, people talk about Hitler burning down his Parliament building or
Yeah, the
things like
Reichstag.
that. Yeah, the
Well,
Reichstag.
the Reichstag fire is an interesting one because it almost certainly was just a communist person went in and set a fire and it burnt down the building. Big buildings do catch fire sometimes. So it was essentially what Hitler said. It was an act of sabotage. Now, he really, really exploited it and he used that event essentially to solidify his power base and continue like the persecution of the minorities, like the Jewish people and the communists, especially communists and trade unionists and things like that at the start of Nazism that were the target. So that people quote that as being a conspiracy, but it probably wasn't. Now, there are obviously things that were conspiracies. You look at Nixon and Watergate. That was a conspiracy between Nixon and some other people to cover up some break-ins in the buildings and to wiretap people. Nixon was a crook, and he did conspire on a large number of things. So obviously, like, conspiracies do happen, and they do happen at the highest levels of government.
Right.
But a lot of the examples that people give us of conspiracy theories that came true were actually things that were never really conspiracy theories. They just were secret, and then they were revealed at some point. The point about conspiracy theories is that they are a conspiracy. That they are a theory, like someone is saying, yeah, this might happen, but they don't really have any solid evidence of it. So there's actually very few examples, and none significant ones that I can really think of, where people said this thing is a conspiracy. No one believed them, and then later it was revealed to be a conspiracy.
Mm-hmm.
And there are obviously very significant conspiracies that go on, like, for example, Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi Arabian guy who worked for the Washington Post, I think, who got murdered by the Saudi Arabians. Saudi Arabians said, no, we didn't do it. And then later on, they
Yes, we
admitted
did, but we
doing
got
it.
in a fight, and then
And the story changed. So you could say that was a conspiracy theory because people were theorizing that the Saudis did it. And from a Saudi perspective, if you're a Saudi citizen, there were a lot of people that were flat out denying it and saying that's just the Americans making stuff up.
right.
So from their perspective, a Saudi citizen who believes in the government, it's a conspiracy theory, and it's actually one that came true. So these things do happen. But what we're talking about really is things like 9/11. We're talking about chemtrails. We're talking about false flag shootings where Sandy Hook didn't happen. We're talking about the flat Earth. These are much more extreme types of things, and there aren't things like that have happened in the past that have been revealed.
What is forgive me if I'm misremembering these events, but do you remember it was 1898 here, the USS Maine, the ship that was in Cuba there? What was the story there again? I'm trying to play devil's advocate now and get into the conspiracy side. And there's got to be some time where the US sunk one of their own ships or their own planes or something, and
I don't actually remember offhand if the Maine was a false flag or not. I would have to look that up. But people said it was, and I'm sure there's some people who said it was, and some people who said it wasn't. But either way, it was an event that was exploited by the Americans. The ship blew up and or was sunk, and they blamed whoever it was on it, and then they used that as a pretext for doing other stuff. And I'm sure that there have been false flag events in the past. I mean, there have definitely been false flag events in the past. Like there was lots of stuff going on during the overthrow of the Shah of Iran, for example, when the Americans wanted to when the Americans wanted to have a regime change in any country. They had a whole bag of dirty tricks that the CIA would do. CIA would go in and they would pretend that certain groups were doing bombings or whatever. This is back in the 50s and 60s. And that type of thing seems to have fallen out of favor, but it's not that hard to imagine that people might still be doing some things like that.
right.
But I don't really think there's a comparable example to the attacks of 9/11. You killed 3,000 American people, including a whole bunch of stockbrokers and
I always just thought, I mean, it seems even if you're going to do a false flag, it just seems a little extra to have that like you could do a smaller one to justify a war. It wouldn't have to be that extravagant. To me, that extravagance comes from the Al-Qaeda sentiment towards
I mean,
the
that's
West.
what the Al-Qaeda had. Their plan was at least 4 planes. There might have actually been others that they were going to fly into large buildings. The World Trade Center. They had 2 planes for that, and they had another plane for the Pentagon, and then they had a 4th plane that was heading towards Washington, towards the White House or the Capitol. So that was their plan. and they more or less pulled it off. But the idea that you would need all of that just to justify an invasion of Iraq, which the hijackers didn't even come from Iraq. They came from, bin Laden was in Afghanistan, and most of the hijackers came from Saudi Arabia.
Yep.
Now, of course, we had to invade Afghanistan first just to make things look legit. Saudi Arabia got completely off the hook because, they weren't like, actual Saudi officials. They were Saudi rebels or whatever. But
A couple from
you
Morocco,
mentioned,
was it true? There's two of them from
yeah,
Morocco or
yeah,
something
there
like
were some
that?
from Morocco. I think it was more than 2/3 of them were from Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
But yeah, if it was a false flag, it was the most convoluted and ridiculous and risky false flag ever. And I think that is one of the biggest arguments against it. The sheer amount of risk that would have been involved in rigging two buildings with explosives. Yeah, and apparently it would have to be from top to bottom, every single floor,
A
thousands
million
of
ceiling
explosives.
tiles.
Yeah, a million ceiling tiles per building. It's just the odds of an operation like that actually working. It would be hard enough just to get one plane be hijacked and fly that one plane into a building. That in itself would be an astonishing thing. That itself would get the attention of the world, and that in itself would given sufficient pretext for invasion.
Exactly. Right.
They kill hundreds, if not maybe 1,000 people or so by doing something like that.
Totally.
But even doing that, even just flying a plane into a building, is a very, very risky thing to do, to be done by the American government, because it's going to get investigated. So either you've got to have the entire FBI and CIA in on it, or it's just highly improbable for it ever to work. And I think people really need to take a step back and look at, does this seem like a good idea? Would they actually do something like this? Sure, the result was great for the project for the New American Century, and that it gave them like kind of a rationale for pushing their agenda. So the result is great, but
Patriot
would
Act.
they actually have started from before that and actually done that? I really don't think so.
Yeah, speaking of probability, I don't know if you're familiar with David Robert Grimes. He's from the UK, but he was on the podcast before, and he wrote a really neat scientific study. It's called "On the Viability of Conspiratorial
Right.
Beliefs," and
Yeah, I've read that.
it basically goes through the how many people mathematically would have to be involved in these various conspiracies, and it's just astronomical. Like as far as UFO, I mean, whether
Hmm.
it's you're looking at NASA employees or whether you're looking at doctors that are hiding a cure for something, or whether like people are notoriously bad at keeping secrets. And it's
Yeah.
just, and you can go through debunk every little point for every conspiracy, or you could just look, I mean, look at it probability wise and just in that
What's the
sense.
simplest explanation? The simplest explanation is that terrorists hijacked some planes and flew them into a building.
Right, right.
Uh, yeah, and it's not just the number of people that would need to be involved. I mean, that's obviously huge. Like we had the entire FBI investigating it. It's the fact that that large number of people cannot keep secrets. If you've
Right.
got hundreds of people in on a plot, it's quite probable that one of those people is going to leak the information. Over the years, they've got family, they grow old, they die. Someone's going to leak something. But
Yeah.
a plot this size would require tens of thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands of people. Some
I mean,
people like talk about
Beyonce dropped
how,
an album and nobody knew it was coming. Like, how do you explain that?
well,
Those
yeah,
are
it doesn't take.
non-disclosure agreements, right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
It takes, it's like 40 people, and they all sign non-disclosure agreements for a year that say they have to pay $1 million if they reveal it. It's like if you watch, Survivor, like a TV show, like Big Brother or whatever. Like there's some TV show where it's pre-recorded, but you don't know what's going to happen. All the
yeah,
people who are on that show, they've all signed non-disclosure agreements. So yeah, it's easy to keep a secret for a small number of people for a short amount of time if they've got a huge financial incentive and it's completely benign.
right.
People who are on Survivor, they're fine with not losing $1 million, so they don't reveal who won it. But if you've got something like, something that caused the death of 3,000 Americans, and then, hundreds of, or if not thousands more in the wars
Totally.
that followed, and then possibly hundreds of thousands, if not like over 1 million people in those countries who died following those events, then,
Yes.
I think someone is going to leak if you've got 10,000 or 100,000 people actually involved in the
Well, I
operation.
mean, and people turn themselves in for murder all the time, things like that. I mean, people have guilt and that kind of thing. But I mean, I guess if you think that they're reptilians or they're not humans, and maybe you moved your goalposts around
You can
to,
always you can always come up
yeah,
with some.
yeah, for sure. Speaking of CIA and real conspiracies, if the Ravenscraig, the CIA LSD experiments that happened in
Mhm.
Montreal at McGill University. I've been to that building. I haven't been inside, but it's a creepy building when you look at it from the outside. But that's an example of a real operation that went on where how long did they actually keep that secret for? I think it was like a while, like a good while.
Yeah. I think it came out in like 77. I'm just looking at an article here. Like, yeah, 77 was when they revealed it in a hearing, but it started back in the 50s, I think, didn't it?
Yeah, I think the main idea was that people were being experimented on with these different drugs.
Hmm.
I think LSD being the main one, and just high doses and that kind of thing. And they some of them would, like that movie Jacob's Ladder, go
Yeah,
crazy, this and
yeah.
that. But then they would, I think they were trying to tell people, but people weren't believing them. And then it did come out later, like you said, a couple decades later, that there was some truth to all that. That's just one interesting example of a real operation that people do
Yeah.
sort of keep secrets for a while at least.
Yeah, but I don't know, like before 77, were there actually like books saying, this was going on? I don't know if it was to that extent. There's probably
Yeah, I'm not
individuals
sure.
who said like, this happened to me. But yeah, back then, it was like the Cold War, essentially. Back then, it was the Cold War.
Yeah.
And they were trying to figure out methods of interrogation and interrogation resistance.
Hmm.
And so it seemed, like it was worth it. People did things like back then, like they would experiment with chemical weapons essentially on people, see how they reacted to various weapons. LSD, when LSD came out, it wasn't illegal and it was used by doctors.
Hmm.
So it was like, semi benign because they didn't really understand exactly what it did.
Yeah.
So you could see it kind of like slipping through the cracks.
Hmm.
But they went. People went behind the scenes, and people did bad things back then. There was the Tuskegee syphilis case where they injected a whole bunch of African Americans with syphilis just to see what would happen, basically. So it's things bad things have happened in the past.
Yeah.
You can't get away from that, and this is something we always need to be vigilant of. That stop bad things happening in the future. But just because something happened in the past, it doesn't mean that something is happening now. Things
Exactly.
have changed. A lot of that stuff ended, quite a long time ago, and the world has changed now. There's a lot more. It was easier to cover things up back in the 50s and 60s because you didn't have cell phones and you didn't
Yes.
have people weren't carrying cameras everywhere with them and having their every movement monitored. So things were
Well,
done with
even WikiLeaks,
typewriters.
right? Like something like
Yeah.
WikiLeaks. There's these releases all the time where we're finding. I mean, it's hard to keep track of them because there's so
Hmm.
much coming out. But you'd be surprised if you don't know like how much stuff is coming out, being revealed of not only American government or corporations doing things that are illegal
Hmm.
or unethical, that kind of thing. It's hard to keep track of it. There's so much stuff going on. But
Yeah, there's the Panama Papers.
mhm,
They just, all that offshore banking that they did. So there's loads of corruption there, and they just arrested like a bunch of people, I think, in some German banks.
mhm.
They just took them that long to wade through all that stuff. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff now. It just comes out. You get these leaks, and that's actually another kind of a mark against these big conspiracy theories. You get things like the WikiLeaks, Edward Snowden, like releasing all that stuff, Chelsea Manning releasing all that stuff, uh, and there's nothing in it about a 9/11 plot. Yeah, there's
Right.
loads of corruption. There's loads of bad things going on, and there's loads of illegal activity that's been revealed in these things, especially in things like the Panama Papers. because it's financial. But there's no chemtrails, there's no 9/11 controlled demolition, there's even no 9/11 inside job. There's a document dump going on right now with this Dark Lord character, which all it is a whole trove of documents from insurance litigators, essentially. So it's these insurance people talking to various eyewitnesses and taking their depositions, and so you've got hundreds of hours of depositions, but it's all just the insurance companies trying to wheedle out of paying their insurance things. There's nothing in it about controlled demolition,
Right.
and nothing yet really about any kind of inside job whatsoever. And I don't think that there will be. They'll release it all. They'll trick people into paying the money to get them to release it, and there'll be nothing there.
Mm. Another thing that people often do when they're trying to convince you of a conspiracy or one of these mysterious things or aliens or anything like that is they'll point you to some authority figure, like we were talking about Paul Hellyer. He was the defense minister, I believe, of Canada. Still alive today. He's 95, and he's wrote a bunch of books on this kind of thing. And me and you were going back and forth about it, how he doesn't actually have evidence, but he will continue to say his story that there's aliens that have been visiting, very specific details like 4 species, this and that. They look like this, they talk like this, that kind of thing. And I just saw a video. Someone tried to have him respond to one of Joe Rogan's criticisms, I guess, and his defense of the critique was, buy my books, I'm not lying. Everyone else is a paid misinfo agent, that kind of thing. And I always think, like, read my books, I'm not lying. I mean, what kind of evidence is that? Like, why wouldn't you just say the sentence in the book that is the evidence?
Yeah. I'm always happy to quote lines from my book if I have it. I give people whole chapters sometimes, but I think he wants people to buy his book, basically. But if you read the things he says, he's not providing evidence from his time in the government. He's just basically repeating something he's read somewhere. I think he gets a lot of it from a guy called Alfred Webre. Can't remember how to pronounce his name.
Okay.
Alfred Webre, let's call him that, who's a guy who believes in time travel. He believes that the CIA time traveled from the 1960s to get his book to figure out how to assassinate JFK. This is something he literally believes actually happened. And then this is the guy that your guy, what's his name again? The
Paul
Canadian?
Hellyer?
Yeah, Hellyer. It's a good name, that, Hellyer.
Yeah.
He got all this information from Alfred Webre, who is this crazy guy, basically, who believes in time travels and aliens contacting him.
Yeah.
So he's not an expert. He's someone who was once in a position of power. Doesn't really mean that he had any advanced skill or technical skill in these subjects. He's never revealed anything that was his that's like secret documentation or anything like that, or a secret program. So he's just some guy, and you see this a lot. There's in the chemtrail thing, there's a guy called Ted Gunderson, who was the head of the Los Angeles FBI back in I think the 70s or 80s. So you'd think he's a great guy who would know what's going on. He'll be able to tell you the lowdown on this chemtrail program. But all he does is repeat the stuff that he's seen on chemtrail videos. Like, he'll tell you stuff about, there's barium being found in the soil, and planes shouldn't make lines when they fly overhead, and then go and visit geoengineeringwatch.org, which is the site that he obviously just read, and he got all this stuff from. So you see these experts who really aren't experts at all. They're just regular people with who happen to be in some position of power at some point.
Yeah, and that kind of leads some of us to think, wow, he's in such a position of power. Why would he almost risk that position maybe to say this information, something like that, maybe that appeals to us?
It's usually after that, though. It's they're retired people, usually old men, who were doing something in the 80s or whatever. If you look at a lot of people in the, say, UFO disclosure, and you go to a UFO disclosure conference, it's just a sea of old men, basically.
Right.
And they've got. It's not like they've got nothing to lose. They've got nothing better to do. They used to be busy, and then they retired, and then they cast around for something, and they happened to watch some video that seemed particularly compelling, and they didn't fill up the other half, so they're stuck in this half.
No, that makes sense. I want to jump to what's your YouTube channel called? Is it actually just Mick West, or is there a couple
Yeah,
channels?
Mick West.
Okay, because
Just
you have
Mick
a lot
West.
of really good short videos explaining different phenomena that happen on cameras and that kind of thing. Because I have a friend, my friend Steve, shout out Steve. He gave me permission to shout him out on the podcast. He had sent me the video which I sent you, which is what we determined to be a light pillar.
Yeah.
Now he says he doesn't know what it is. And I showed him the link because I saw the link from the Weather Channel a few days before me and you were exchanging that video. And it was a funny coincidence where I'd learned about light pillars from the Weather Channel a few days before. And then he sent me this other video from Edmonton. There was this red light in the sky. And at first you said it may be a reflection on a window, but then when you got home, you saw the video at full size and you said, yeah, it's definitely a light pillar. And now I can't repeat the science. It's something about crystals and the way the light refracts off the crystals in the air.
Yeah, when it's very, very cold, you basically get a cloud forming at a fairly low altitude, essentially, and the cloud is made up of ice crystals. And like ice crystals, they form in hexagonal shapes, and it depends on the actual conditions, the humidity and the speed of the change of the temperature and the air movement. But often what happens is the ice crystals will form into little hexagonal plates. And so you've got these little hexagonal plates that are kind of drifting down through the air. And because they're drifting down, they're all horizontal. They're not flipping around. They just kind of go like this, like a leaf falling down. So you get this huge cloud that's made up of these horizontal plates. So if you've got a light off in the distance, you get the light reflecting off the bottom of that plate. And so every single plate reflects like a different light. So you get basically these streaks of light in the same way that you get when the sun is fairly low over the sea, you will get what looks like a long line of light going from you out to the sun. There's like a long golden ripple on the surface of the sea. It's kind of like that, except it's in the sky. And it's off these hexagonal ice crystals. And this is something that you can just observe because it happens in places like Edmonton all the time. Usually when it happens, it's happening with a bunch of city lights that are a bit further away. So you see a whole bunch of these beams. But if you're in a place where there's only one very bright light off in the distance, like say a couple of miles away, then you're just going to get one single light streak. You also see them, I've seen them myself here, when the sun is setting, you'll sometimes see a column of light directly above the sun. So you can demonstrate that this is an optical phenomenon that does actually happen. So
Yeah,
then we get a
there's plenty
photograph
of optical
something that looks like
phenomenon, right? I mean, there's plenty.
Oh
There's
yeah,
so many. The
yeah.
Aurora Borealis. I mean, there's all kinds of different light things and strange clouds. And I mean,
Halos.
the universe is an amazing place with and our senses and the way we interpret the universe is pretty neat. I mean, there's a lot to be learned there. Most people I think can admit that they don't know the extent of how it all works. I mean, even when you get deep into the consciousness and the identity and the way, just everything about that. I mean, there's just I mean, his retort was sort of, I don't believe the Weather Channel, and I said, I mean, I know that sometimes they get the weather wrong, but I mean, again, it speaks to the probability of is this large organization only funded by this, to just put misinformation out there and trick you to.
But it's not like there's only the Weather Channel showing you this stuff. If you just do a
Exactly.
Google search for light pillars, you'll see thousands
Right.
of different sources of the information on light pillars. You can look up old books. I've got a collection of old books on the weather. I've got a huge number of them. Just popping off real quick. I've got this one old book here. This is from the 1800s, and it probably, I haven't actually looked through it, but it probably has a description of light pillars in it. Here's like some pictures of some cirrus clouds that people now would say were chemtrail clouds. But this is a photo from 1894. So you can get these old books quite cheaply on the internet, and you can look them up, and they have these descriptions of light pillars. Light pillars don't happen every day. I've seen like maybe 2 in my entire life, and they're really cool to see. If
Yeah.
you live in Edmonton, you're going to see more because it's colder there. But you will see them, and next time you'll recognize it. And the thing is, it looks exactly like a light pillar. You look at all these other
Yeah,
pictures of light
exactly.
pillars.
Yeah.
This one,
What is it?
is
Is it an
thin at the
angel? Is it
bottom.
an alien? Is it a spirit? Yeah, like,
Yeah.
yeah. My other thing was that you can say, oh, the source is not credible. I don't believe NASA. I don't believe the Weather Channel. I don't believe whatever the government. But what about the science behind it? Unless you can disprove the science, the scientific reasoning, um, I don't think you've got anything there. And that's, I think, another thing that people misunderstand is the scientific method and how
Yeah.
scientists come to a conclusion. I think even in the religious community, they often look at science, they call it. It's like a group of people that believe one thing, but it's not really. It's just people who work on science using the scientific method.
Well, in this example, I think you don't even really need to get deep into the science. Like, the explanation I just gave with the hexagonal plates is the real explanation, but you don't even need to do that. You can just observe the fact that they appear above light.
Right.
If you go to some positions, like sometimes the lights are beyond the horizon or they're behind some trees or something and you can't see them. But a lot of the times, if you just do a Google search for light pillars, you'll see a lot of the examples. You can actually see the light beneath the light pillar itself. So you're seeing like some city lights in the distance, and you see a corresponding set of light pillars above those bright lights. And if you were to at your friend's location, and you were looking at this one orange light that's off in the distance, and if you were to get in a helicopter and go up in the sky a bit, you would be able to see this one bright light off in the distance on some building somewhere. So you don't have to understand the science to simply observe that sometimes these light streaks appear above lights in the sky, and there's no reason to think an angel would just be hovering above a street light.
Right, right. You also one of the good videos on your YouTube channel is you have plenty of these, but I think it was a recent one where there was a water droplet on the lens,
Yeah.
and so the Facebook video went viral, and it was some sort of light in the background. Maybe there was another like a lightning storm or something, and then all of a sudden this light just kind of spreads out into this very odd shape, and it
Yeah.
looks like something mysterious. But you slowed down and zoomed into the video, and once you zoom in and actually carefully look, you can see the house line, the line of the houses and the apartment buildings, and how you can see that it looks like a water droplet when you closely examine it, right?
Yeah, you can see that it's just duplicating and distorting what's beneath it. So you can see the light itself is kind of distorted, and that's what's causing this kind of jellyfish-like UFO. But it's also distorting everything else in the scene as well. And that's not immediately apparent, like if you're looking at it on a small screen, like if you're just looking at it in your Facebook feed or on your phone. So you can look at it full screen and you kind of expand, you brighten it up and stuff. You can see what's going on. But then I also duplicated the effect in my garage. I took my phone and I dropped a little bit of water on the lens and kind of shook it off and then pointed it at a light, and you got the exact same effect. But not everyone is easily convinced, because I think people like the idea that it's some kind of alien
I like it
spaceship or
too. I
whatever.
kind of like it.
Yeah, I'd love it. It'd be great if there was actually an alien spaceship coming in. That'd be fascinating.
Speaking of believing in aliens, back when I watched that Zeitgeist movie, I mean, I too was experimenting with marijuana, different things like that. So
Mm.
my mind was kind of expanding and looking for different things to get into and believe in, I suppose. And one of the things was really odd is there was this YouTuber that was basically one of those channelers that would put out
Right.
videos, and it would be an alien that's from the Sirius system, and her name was
Yeah.
Salusa. And so essentially, I believe what the real thing was someone was typing stuff out and having one of those computer narrators read it. So it wasn't a voice; it was more like one of those computer voices. And the funny thing is, I looked up that alien's name the other day because I used to watch these videos, and I was half convinced by them back then. I don't know why, but
Hmm.
and they would always be telling of some future things that are coming, and some spiritual stuff mixed in, and it all kind of made sense because if you use vague enough sort of spiritual language, people kind of connect to it. And so I looked up this alien and I found their old blog, and the last message was from 2015, and it said, "We will soon be revealing the disclosure or the the stuff we're working on with your governments and this and that. And I was like, well, where'd it go? Like, what happened? Like, you just dropped off.
Yeah,
Like, you gave up.
that's
Like,
the problem.
and who knows? Maybe the guy died, or maybe he like got a job. Like, who knows what happened to that? But it's just a funny thing where it's like, wow, I was kind of convinced by this back then, and
Well,
now,
it's like QAnon, isn't it? Like now, like the whole Q thing is
yeah, I
all
want to get into
about.
that actually next. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, QAnon basically is a series of predictions. They've been constantly predicting things, and the guy behind QAnon. Have you heard of Nostradamus?
Hmm.
Middle Ages guy, and he wrote a bunch of what are called quatrains, which are like little poems, which were supposedly predicting the future. And if you read them, they don't seem to make any sense. But if you kind of read them and then say, oh, maybe this is predicting Princess Di as, oh yeah, like, princess in the carriage goes for a ride and everything changes. Oh, that's Princess Di being assassinated or whatever.
Hmm.
And it's easy to shoehorn an event onto an explanation when you look back at it. It's harder to predict it. So if you want to be a Nostradamus, what you should do is you should give your predictions in the form of riddles. You shouldn't say exactly what's going to happen, because
Hmm.
if you do, then it won't happen, and people will stop following you. But if you give a riddle, then when something happens, your followers can say, "Oh, well, that proves it, because I can fit that to this particular riddle." And if you give a lot of riddles, then there's always one of them that's going to fit what happens in the future. So it sounds like you're actually being right all the time when you're not. And
Yeah.
QAnon
For people who don't
hasn't.
know, it's these crumbs they call them, right? On 4chan or 8chan
Yeah.
now, that there's this Q character that will post these cryptic messages, like you said, and they call these crumbs. And then what they call the bakers are, I suppose, people who read and interpret them and then connect the dots.
Hmm.
Like some of them will say this and that, and then I'll give a number, 22 something something, and then in the White House, Trump will be with 22 of his uh, staff, and they'll say, "Look at the there." He said it 2 days ago. Look at the timestamp. But or
Yeah.
he's holding a jersey and he didn't use the number 45 for his presidency. He used 17, which is Q from the alphabet, and
Yes.
I don't see the significance. The whole joke, me and my best friend Nick right now, he kind of tongue in cheek believes in all these conspiracy theories. Like if you really get down to it, he'll probably admit he doesn't, but he loves to just be very educated on them and give
Hmm.
you all the details. So he'll just try to convince me all the time, and we'll say like, what, I don't get what it means though. Like, what is the storm? What is the
Yeah.
storm? I don't know what the storm is. And
Well, the storm is supposed to be that they're going to arrest all the Democrats and a bunch of people in Hollywood as some
which is
kind
this
of yeah,
pedophilia
the
ring
pedophile ring
idea.
thing. Yeah,
So how do you
it's
can you debunk Pizzagate for me in like a few sentences? Like what's with Podesta's artwork and all that weird stuff? Because isn't that kind of weird?
yeah, no, it is. It's slightly disturbing artwork, but the that's probably the one you're referring to is the slight depictions of child abuse, which was
Uh-huh.
actually the artist there was a survivor of child abuse, and they were they were basically making paintings of their own experience, what they remembered from they said they were part of some kind of child sex ring, and they're doing paintings of that. But uh, yeah, I don't think that was Podesta anyway. That was like it was like some gallery that he was a patron of or
And
something.
there was like 400 pieces of art or 500 pieces of art, and that was just one or two of them that kind of were from this one
Yeah.
specific
Yeah,
artist.
it's this one artist. I think there were some other ones that had children in them, but if you look at the entirety of the art world, some of the paintings are going to be of children. So it's if you all you do is look at the paintings of children, then collect them all together, it's going to look kind of creepy because all you're doing is you've got the paintings of children, but I'm sure they have all kinds of paintings there. But yeah, the thing is, you can't really debunk things like this because it's all based on this very twisted interpretation of things like Podesta's emails. Like, there's one series of emails where they're talking about going to a pasta party at a friend's house, and the pool is going to be there, and there's going to be some kids there, and they say things like, "It'll be fun with the kids in the pool," which, if people say things like that, it sounds perfectly innocuous unless you
Right.
think they're part of some kind of demonic pedophile ring. Now, if you're already
Right.
convinced there are a bunch of demonic pedophiles, then they're the thing, oh, we're going to have fun with the kids in the pool. It
Yeah.
sounds like, really, really nasty, but, it's just, the kids are going to have fun playing in the pool. That's what kids do. So
Right,
it's,
but you build a mosaic of all these other
mm,
things with the painting and I don't know what, but all these things that then are supposedly proof of something
yeah,
going on. I mean, it's strange stuff. I mean, it is interesting in some sort of way, like symbology and that kind of thing. Like even with the logos that they try to portray as, I don't know, this pizza place's logo has this Satanistic thing in it or something. I mean, I do graphic
yeah.
design for a living too, so it's interesting, like the how logos and symbology and shape and color and these kind of things play on us. Like there's something almost
Uh-huh.
Jungian about that, like archetypes and that kind of thing, that it
But
speaks to some deep level in us.
I think with that, what it was they thought that there was pedophile symbols, and they said that pedophiles had these things where like a triangle meant something, a double circle meant something else, but they're very very simple symbols. So it's quite easy. There's only a limited number of different geometric shapes that you can make, and then you
Yeah.
combine them. There's only a limited number of those. Eventually some of them are going to end up looking vaguely like these. Like if you do a swirl, it will look like the pedophile symbol now because there's a double swirl looks like a pedophile
Yeah, or
symbol.
Trump did a Q with his hand, but he always does this in his hands. I mean,
eventually,
he
eventually, his hands are going to make some kind of
some
shape. So.
yeah. Um, what do you? So I didn't actually get to the part in your book where I guess you talk about the future of conspiracy beliefs and different things coming, like AI and that kind of thing. Could you touch on some of that? Like, what do you see conspiracy belief on the rise, or is it diminishing, or is it?
It's I think it's staying fairly level. It's just kind of changing in kind of intensity and the amount it gets into the public discourse. The number of people who believe in conspiracies may be going up a little bit more, but they've got more of a voice now because it's so easy to get things onto YouTube. And because it's so easy to get things onto YouTube, it's very easy for people to get sucked in to YouTube. YouTube has a problem where it essentially is designed to addict you, and this isn't something they've necessarily consciously decided. They don't set out to say like let's be addictive. They've tried to maximize their profits, and because of
Hmm.
that, the YouTube algorithm has evolved itself just by random selection. It just changes the algorithm to do the things which make the most money, and the things that make the most money tend to be when people watch really, really long videos and get drawn into these videos. And to do that, it basically has to draw you down a rabbit hole.
Hmm.
You watch one video that you think is compelling, and then it will feed you another. And if you like that one as well, then it knows, oh, here's a trajectory that we're on. We started out with like 9/11 is an inside job, and then 9/11 controlled demolition, and then you just get deeper and deeper, and more extreme conspiracy theories, and it will just kind of guide you in. And if you start losing interest, it'll maybe change tack a bit and start showing you different videos. But YouTube is essentially not deliberately, but it is trying to addict you to something. And
Hmm.
sometimes those things turn out to be conspiracy theories.
Yeah, I mean that's a bit of the danger um, with these things, right? You familiar with this book, 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts by Jaron Lanier? He's a
I've heard
VR
of it.
pioneer. Yeah. It's just kind of
Yeah,
interesting because he's around for starting a lot of this stuff. And so I think LinkedIn, he was
yeah.
involved in making something like that, but he's very against social media. And it's kind of an interesting take
Mm.
on the different negative aspects of social media and as far as like how it affects our psychology and that kind of thing.
And your brain chemistry, it actually,
Mhm.
there's he talks about in it. It talks about how you get dopamine hits when you open up Facebook, and if someone likes something that you post, it gives you can actually measure a little change in the brain, a little burst of pleasure chemicals in your brain, and that it also gets you addicted. Uh, and you find yourself, if you're on social media, you find yourself going and checking. I've got to check my social media, or check Facebook, check Twitter, check Instagram, because and it's not even really particularly a conscious thing. You just have this feeling that you need to check it because your body has started to get used to getting these little dopamine hits every time someone likes something you said, or every time you see something, or every time you click on something, it becomes
It,
addictive.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, we're all familiar with this feeling. If you really stop and think about it, like try to, what I do sometimes is delete the apps off my phone. It helps me
Hmm.
to get away from them a bit. But I mean, it always pulls you back now and again. But it's just these days you got to be more conscious of this kind of thing and the fake news and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. And this quick up to the minute, even with the UFO videos or the balls of light, right? You see it, you scroll the next one, you scroll the next one, like
Hmm.
nobody takes the time like you're doing on your YouTube account to sit there and actually examine it, or take the time to read a whole book on a subject that really explains something to you, like Contrails or the science behind any of these things, or like those 9/11 books that go into detail. You might think an hour documentary is a lot of detail, but it's really not compared to the just wealth of info in
Well,
books.
yeah, I mean that's true to a degree, but I mean I wouldn't entirely agree because there are some very, very long and very, very detailed YouTube videos that are conspiracy videos, and there are some very detailed books.
Mm.
Like I have a couple of books here, Debunking 9/11 Debunkers, or
Oh yeah.
Debunking. It's a big thick book.
Right,
It's
right.
like 400, 500 pages. Yeah, 566 pages, and it's got loads of stuff in it, loads and loads of detail. And I think the sheer scale of it can be kind of misleading. There's another book I have, 9/11 Unmasked, which is another quite thick book, 400 plus pages.
Mm.
So that you could actually fill up a whole shelf with 9/11 conspiracy books, and it looks like you've done a lot of research.
Right.
But all you're doing is you're just doing the one side. You haven't really got the other side, and that's actually part of a problem because most scientists and engineers that I know that I've talked to think that 9/11 conspiracy theories are ridiculous,
Mm.
and so they don't address them, and so we get this unbalance because all you've got is these books talking about how 9/11 was an inside job, and you've got very little on the other side. You got popular mechanics book, and you've got some websites like my website. So it
Right.
becomes this unbalanced thing. People think, oh, there's all these architects and engineers, there's all these books, there's all these videos, and there's only like Metabunk and popular mechanics on the other side. So obviously, all these guys must be
Somebody's
right,
paid
and
or whatever. Yeah.
yeah, so
That
it's the
that's
problem.
interesting. Because some people do. I mean, some people don't even know about these. Like you say, chemtrails. Some people they're like,
Oh
"What?
yeah,
I don't know what you're talking about."
most people don't know about them, and
Yeah.
that that people who are into 9/11 conspiracy theories think that it's this big deal and everybody's heard about it. But yeah, I think the stuff like the controlled demolition conspiracy theories, most people I talk to, they just say, "What? That's ridiculous." And the
Right.
chemtrail stuff, they've never even heard of chemtrails.
Right.
And then like flat Earth, obviously, they just think that's completely ridiculous, not even worth talking about.
Hmm.
Yeah, so uh, there's this misconception that they're talking about some kind of mainstream topic when they're going on about Building 7. But they're not. It's still a fringe thing.
Hmm.
You get these polls of people like, do they think 9/11 was an inside job, or was the government involved? And you get a good chunk of the population who says yes, but they're not saying like it was a controlled demolition. They're saying the government isn't telling us everything about 9/11, which is probably true. I would probably go on that side of the camp. I'm sure there are a lot of things that people in power did on those days and in subsequent days that
Or
hasn't
didn't
come
do
to
like
light.
preventing or
Oh yeah,
whatever that kind of thing.
yeah. It's a bunch of CYA, like they're trying to protect themselves and their friends.
Yeah.
People fucked up on those
Hmm.
days.
Yeah, for
They
sure.
they people made mistakes, but people didn't think it was worth punishing people for things like that. It was better to go after the bad guys, and so perhaps stuff was swept under the rug. Stuff like the failures of the air traffic controllers to direct the fighters to the right place. Those failures of the system, which you could perhaps pin on some individual, but really it was a series of events that no one was really prepared for, and so people didn't perhaps do their best. But
Hmm.
yes,
What's
but
one
yeah,
last quick thing that you can debunk for me? Because somebody mentioned this
okay.
to me the other day, and I wasn't that good at debunking it. Is that the line that they say where what is it? Something that only the Bin Laden family was allowed to fly out of U.S. airspace on some secret plane on the
Yeah,
day.
I think that was true. It was. a few days after 9/11, and they got on a chartered flight. It was some members of the Bin Laden family and some other people from Saudi Arabia. But there was a lot of people were given special exemptions then. The Bin Ladens, they're not all terrorists. The most of the Bin
Oh, of
Laden family
course.
are. Yeah,
Construction
it's
family,
just
right?
yeah, it's a huge family, and he has like something like 100 brothers and sisters, and because his father had like several wives, as I remember. So yeah, like rich Saudi Arabians were allowed to fly back to Saudi Arabia on a chartered flight with special agreements with the government. A
Oh, so
bunch of
they
other
just
rich
made
people.
some sort of agreement. Like, I mean, who was there other examples of people that did this that are known? Like,
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm sure that there were. Anybody who was like super rich foreign people who were in the country at the time would need to get back to their home countries, and they would just make some agreement with the government. If you there's no security risk for a flight like that if it's all prearranged and screened by people. It's just that you couldn't turn the general aviation system back on because you didn't have the screening for every single flight. The special flights were arranged for the rich and the powerful to move back around the world, so they weren't all trapped in America. And some of them were Bin Laden's
mhm.
relatives of Osama bin Laden. So yeah, that's something that happened, but there's a reasonable explanation for it. They're rich, powerful people. They had contacts
Yeah.
in the government, and they arranged to fly back.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes you hear the fact and you're stuck on it for a moment, and your brain doesn't know which way to go until somebody presents you with that other fact. Like you said that, well, there were other chartered flights, and then your brain goes,
And
oh, okay, that makes sense. Like nobody
and
told me that, or I
I would
couldn't
look into
find.
it.
Mm.
I wouldn't. I just vaguely remembering what happened. It's not something I've really looked into.
Yeah.
But look into it and look into all sides of it. Obviously, like
Hmm.
maybe there's claims that these people were somehow connected, but also look into what other people flew out. Exactly what day it was. Like where were there other people flying to other countries? And
Right.
there probably were. It's just you hear about this one because of the connection with the name. It sounds suspicious.
For sure. Okay, well, thanks for doing the podcast with us here today, Mick. Is there any, could you plug your websites and Metabunk and your Twitter
Yeah.
and that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, my Twitter is Mick West. My YouTube is Mick West. My Facebook is Metabunk. And my website, metabunk.org. That's where I spend most of my time debunking stuff. And if you're interested in that stuff, I've got a book, Escaping the Rabbit Hole: How to Debunk Conspiracy Theories Using Facts, Logic, and Respect, which is all about how to talk to your friends who believe in conspiracy theories. And I cover 9/11, chemtrails, flat Earth, and false flag type things in there in quite a bit of detail, as well as a bunch of general advice on how to talk to people. So that's me.
Pretty cool. Highly recommended book. It's also available in audiobook format. That's how I got it too. So if you're on Audible, grab that. Thanks again, Mick, and best of luck. Keep doing what you're doing. We'll talk soon.
Great. Thanks a
All
lot.
right. See ya.